Is Florida State a playoff contender? We're not fooling around. We're getting straight to it. You see senior writer Corey Clark right there. You see the owner, founder, administrator, the overall man, Gene Williams, up there in that other corner. I'm a talking head. That's what I do, and we're going to talk Florida State right now. Let's do this thing, okay? Is Florida State – let's just start with the premise. Is Florida State a playoff contender? Go, Corey, now.
Yes. Can I elaborate, or is it just a yes or no? Okay, yes.
I just want a yes or no. You say yes,
go for
Gene.
it, Corey. Yes. I guess I can't elaborate, so we'll save that. But yes, I think they are.
I too say yes. That's 3 for 3. Good. So we're all in the same place on the same footing. Now, Corey, back to you. Yeah, elaborate, buddy.
Great lead in, Jeff. I appreciate that. I think that when you look at how they finished the season, top 10, and you can argue whether they should have been 9th or 12th or whatever, they're in the conversation as one of the top 10 programs in the country, our teams in the country. And they brought so much of that back. Like literally, I don't know, man, Dylan Gibbons, Jamie Robinson, one or two other people are the only really big losses they had from an already 10-win team, and the additions you're bringing in that make the roster even better. Your coaching staff might be better, probably is better. Like when you account for all that, and the schedule is a little softer, I don't know how anybody could argue that they're not at least a playoff contender. Because to be a playoff contender, what are we, if we want to define our terms? You're in the top 8 in the country. You're vying for a spot in the top 4. Like I think if they play well and only lose one game, they are absolutely contending for a playoff and probably in it.
Yeah, and I think you're just scratching the surface there, Corey. You're absolutely right. And the reason I didn't have to tee you up is, A, you're an excellent public speaker, and B, there are a lot of reasons why Florida State is a playoff contender. Gene, you can jump on some of the others, but can we start with the fact that they have a really good quarterback? Corey didn't even mention it. They got a guy that took this massive step forward in a way that I've never seen a college quarterback take that kind of step. A guy that was primarily known as a runner, an okay passer, became a very good passer who could beat you from the pocket and never run if he didn't want to. That is a huge part of why they're a playoff contender.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Because you've seen teams where these elite dual-threat quarterbacks, they can put those guys, they can put them on their shoulder, and they can carry teams to just incredible production, a lot of wins. So, yeah, that gets you in the conversation right there by itself. You need the other pieces to be a viable contender. But, let's assume Mike Norvell is going to continue what he did the last 2 years, and he hits at a high rate on the transfer. So if he does that with the guys coming in, filling a bunch of key holes, how can they not be? I mean, every viable person, there's a couple isolated, members, but everybody has them in the top 10. Heck, people like USA Today and I think Schleybaugh or whoever had them in the top 4. So there's obviously, this isn't just Florida State, us homers going, oh boy, look, Florida State's a playoff contender. There's people in the national media who are recognizing how good Florida State is and the pieces are in place. We'll talk about what needs to happen for that to happen. But in terms of the initial tools that you need to have, because let's face it, there's maybe 10, 15 teams that even have a chance to crack that top 4. This is the first time we can say in a long time, maybe since 2015 or 16, because those teams had some talent, they massively underachieved. But the first time we can viably say, yes, this team has the tools to be in the conversation.
It's interesting too, guys, when we think about who is and who isn't a playoff contender. I think that the spectrum of teams that are eligible for that label just grew this past year, because nobody would have guessed that a sub-500 TCU team from the year before was going to play for a national championship. They made the playoff and got to the national championship game. So with the right coaching, and you're right, additional pieces to the puzzle, filling it out, you get a better picture of what Florida State is. They really do portend of a really good football team next year. This team won 10 games this year. They're going to be better next year. So there's no way really you could argue, to Corey's point, I don't think there's a way you can argue they're not a playoff contender. Doesn't mean you think they're going to win the national championship. Doesn't mean you think they're going to go to the playoff. It's just that you can't argue, I don't think, that they're not a contender.
And I also think it doesn't mean that we think they were great in 2022, because they weren't. They had a 3-game losing streak. They beat 2 barely bowl teams by single scores in their last 2 games of the season. It wasn't like they were dominant to end the season, but there isn't a lot of domination in college football. There is at the very, very tippy top. But everybody else, 3 through, 12, they're all pretty close. And I just think Florida State is now in that conversation. And what, like alluding to what Jeff said, the one huge bonus that Florida State has is who the quarterback is, and he's awesome. That is a huge deal when you're talking about reaching potential and maybe getting a chance to win enough games to get to the playoff. You know who your quarterback is. And other than USC, don't you feel better about your quarterback than any other school in the country? Because all the big boys are having to replace them. And you never know. There could be some misses with that. So I just think Jordan Travis changes the math a little bit on what you think this team can be.
Well, and they improved their offensive line this past year. It figures to be better this year as well as they continue to bring in needed pieces there. This is a much deeper defensive line. We certainly think that's going to be the case with what they've brought in, both in recruiting, but also the transfer portal, where they've hit home runs there as well. They get Jared Verse back. Roster retention at the end of the day, guys, is another big reason we think that they're playoff contenders. If you think about what they were able to save from this roster after winning 10 games and how many of those guys are upwardly mobile in terms of where they're headed with their careers. These are guys that are proven players getting better, and now they have a lot of experience. And now I would think too, Gene, we could talk about a team that I think enters the year with an awful lot of confidence, because prior to this past season, they thought they could get better. They worked hard to try and get better, but they didn't have any proof that they were better. Now they have proof that they're better in the way of 10 wins. And again, they're a team that, probably should have won the NC State game, but also they're motivated by those close wins at the end of the year where they realize they've got room to grow.
Well, that's a great point. You go back to that Florida game and the Oklahoma game where you realize this wasn't the team that was blowing Syracuse off the map. They were not that good. That was just an overrated, not very good Syracuse team. And some of those other blowout wins they had when they played a team with the viable players in the line of scrimmages, in the trenches, they struggled. If not for great play by the quarterback and some outstanding coaching, I think by Mike Norvell, they probably lose those games. So they realize there's some holes to fit. And I think that's going to help the hunger going into the offseason. Now, we go into this whole thing and we know what this is like. You saw TCU last year. They're able to get in. A team from one of the Power Five can get in with a loss, especially if you win your conference, but they have to have some luck. They have to have some injury luck, especially. You can't lose Jordan Travis. This isn't Alabama or Georgia where you can lose a 5-star tackle and just roll somebody else in. They can't afford those kind of losses. And what you also have to do, which they did well, except for that, you mentioned that NC State game, is win those close games. I went back and looked. I was surprised. TCU played 7 one-score games. They were 6-1 in those games.
Yeah.
Florida State is going to – they're not so good they're going to blow everybody off the map. This isn't 2013 FSU. If they're going to do this, they might lose a game, but they're going to have 3, 4, maybe 5 games are going to be down the last possession or so. And they did well for the most part in that, but you're going to have that kind of luck or that kind of chutzpah at the end of a game to hold on and win those.
Well, that's good that you brought it up, Gene, because that's the second part of this conversation I wanted us to have. Corey, I'll flip it to you there. I was going to ask, if they don't make the college football playoff, why? What is it that you could foresee being a problem for this football team? Because I think Gene's right. There are areas where they've added depth. There'll be real competition. We're so excited to cover spring for you guys that are watching this video. Like, this is the most excited I'm going to be for spring football in a long time, because there's competition at a lot of the segment groups that we haven't had in a long time. But they're not completely full the way that Georgia is or Ohio State is, Corey. So if things go off the mark, why would that be?
Look, I think when I look at this roster right now, I think that Gene brought it up. I think injury luck would be the biggest reason. There are some holes. Like, look, you're not incredible at safety, clearly. You're not incredible at linebacker. You're decent, but you have a chance to be very good at corner. You have a chance to be very, very good at on the defensive line if you stay healthy. But again, what if Fisk and Lovett get banged up? What if Darrell Jackson gets banged up? What if Verse gets banged up again? You don't have the depth of those the 5-star bullies to just replace a Jared Verse with another All-American. There's a pretty big gap between. It's getting I guess they're narrowing it a little, but that to me is the biggest concern. And I guess to that point, this defense has to prove it. Look, when you play a great quarterback, you're not going to stop them. That doesn't happen anymore. You just got to slow them down a little bit, and there were just a little too many times where I felt like against a decent to good quarterback, and I'm talking Anthony Richardson, Dylan Gabriel, obviously Sam Hartman, guys like that, they struggled to get a grasp of things. 1 touchdown turned into 4 touchdowns really quickly. And that's my only concern. But as we all know, you're also allowed to get better. And you have a lot of dudes returning who should get better. I mean, that happens a lot in college football. We see it all the time, don't we, Jeff? Well, players improve.
Players get better.
The defense can get better. The defensive line, if it stays healthy, I truly think is going to be one of the best in the country. That's a really big deal, man. That is an enormous deal. If it doesn't stay healthy, well, you're going to have some issues like you did this past year.
You know, I think to put a ribbon on this, it's a fun conversation. I think Florida State fans are having this conversation all over the country, right? That the phone calls have changed. When you're comparing notes on what's possible, you're no longer just asking to have a winning season. You're no longer saying, well, hopefully we make a bowl. Now you're going to talk about real expectations and real pressure. Do we think this team, Gene, can handle expectations, can handle the pressure of being preseason ranked? Because you noted it, a lot of people out there with some pull and some say have Florida State as a top 6 team. That's a different animal than they were this year. This year they came into the season looking to prove they could be good, and they were hunting. Now they'll be the hunted in many cases.
Well, I think we'll know early on, won't we? That first game against LSU, we're going to see how this team. To me, that's the. If you go non-injury thing, that's the biggest indicator of what happens in that first game. Because, man, you win that game, you put yourself in prime position with a winner. It's going to be a top 10, one of the SEC elite, man. You got that in your pocket all season. That'd be awesome. But, no, back to your question. I think they'll be all right because Mike Norvell, the one thing we've seen, people get so sick of us talking about culture and culture and culture, but we've seen that with this team. They do like each other. They play hard. They bought into this coaching staff. We saw moments, I thought, early on, this team could have some issues with that, but then no, we saw times down the stretch where they were pressed and they came through when they needed to, when they had pressure on them, where there were expectations against Oklahoma and against Florida. Well, the year before they didn't come through in those situations, and they did this year. So I've seen the growth there. So I think they're going to be able to handle that all right. But I do want to see that first game being on a big stage like that. A bowl game matters. We get it. It's exciting. It's a whole different animal, and you're paying on prime time in a top 10 matchup against an SEC powerhouse. So we'll see that first game. We're going to real fast.
And if we speak practically about actually trying to get to the playoff, it's hard to figure out a journey where unless Clemson's unbelievable, really, really good, if you lose that first game, I don't know that you can, even if you win out, I don't know that you're going to be able to do enough to impress people if Clemson turns out to just be a 9-win or 8-win team, because there's just not, maybe Florida turns out to be really good, and that would be a great win at the end of the year. But there's not a lot of heavyweights on that schedule to impress. Like TCU, not a big name as a school, but they got to play a lot of big names and in some marquee games that they won, including at Texas and Oklahoma and schools like that. I don't know that you move the needle much when you're beating up Syracuse and Boston College and even Wake Forest without Sam Hartman. That's my one concern. If you lose that LSU game, there's not a lot of room left to impress unless Clemson goes 11-2 and their only 2 losses are to you.
Well, you really think a team, Corey, can be on a 12-game winning streak, win their conference, and be 12-1 and not get one of those Final Four teams? I mean, Gene, I agree the margin is 0 if you lose that LSU. But you lose a competitive game, you win 12 in a row, man. I think they're going to let you in unless – you never know how it's going to shake out, but I think you're in a good position.
You don't, and maybe LSU's awesome, and your only loss is to a really good team that goes, is undefeated. We don't know. I'm just saying the ACC, Gene, I don't know if you've noticed, doesn't get a lot of love from those national media folks and the playoff committee. Yeah. We've lived through that. So I don't know that even on a winning, if all those wins are against ACC teams or a middle-of-the-road Florida, I don't know that. I mean, we were here 7-8 years ago. They went undefeated against the ACC, and they were the number 3
They just
seed.
let TCU in with 1 loss. I don't know. I'm just
but that's what I'm saying. TCU had more. TCU had a chance to play ranked teams.
Let's hope we're having the argument, gentlemen. Let's hope that at the end of a 12-1 campaign, we're arguing about whether or not Florida State should be.
But it's. I guess the point is maybe the biggest game of their season to impress playoff voters is the opener.
Because then you got wiggle room. You could lose a game, but if you win that last game in the ACC championship, I don't think you lose to Clemson up there. Yeah, I don't think it matters. Yeah, it's kind of irrelevant.
That's a huge game against LSU.
I think we all agree if you're going to lose a game in order to get to the playoff, it can only be to LSU or Clemson on the road. I don't really think there's another path for you to get. It can only be one of those two. And hopefully they don't lose either, but I don't know how realistic that is. We do know this. We know that they'll talk about it on Wake Up Warchant. We know they'll talk about it on the Jeff Cameron Show. We know we'll write about it. We've got a lot to cover this offseason because this team's good again, and it allows us to do videos like this one, like, subscribe, do all the things, man. Share it with everybody, and go get signed up right now on warchant.com. Let's get that like and that thumbs up rolling. We got a lot of debates to have about where this team could go in the offseason. For Gene Williams and Corey Clark, I'm Jeff Cameron. Thanks for watching, everybody. Go Noles.